I've always been a console man, but have gone through some limited PC gaming phases over the years, though the last time I was buying Steam games with any regularity was well over a decade and a half ago. Even still, the need to use a PC for gaming does crop up every now and then, with the experience almost always inducing some degree of frustration, whether due to Windows settings, multi-monitor conflicts, audio device weirdness, my preference for gaming on a TV from a couch with a controller, and generally just having to concoct cumbersome workarounds for the various problems that arise from trying to fit a Windows gaming PC into a console-focused setup. So I definitely took notice when gaming on Linux began to rapidly progress in the wake of the Steam Deck, thanks to technologies like Proton and simple yet feature-rich controller-friendly interfaces. I really love the idea of SteamOS, but I don't need the handheld aspect of the Steam Deck. So when Valve announced the Steam Machine, I was convinced I'd be pre-ordering one as soon as possible. I became less sure once I understood how underwhelming its GPU is, alongside hints and speculation surrounding pricing, which is certain to be impacted by the skyrocketing price of RAM that began in the final months of 2025. Well, long story short, I've instead built my own Steam machine. Kind of. I spent around $1,000 with an asterisk or two. Yes, one of those asterisks involves how I got my RAM. It's more capable hardware compared to Valve's, and it's running a Linux-based operating system called Bazzite that's technically not SteamOS, but it darn near pretty much is. Now, none of this is anything new or entirely novel, but I still wanted to put this out there as my own journey through this process as encouragement to fellow PC gaming outsiders. Although I also hope that more hardcore PC people who maybe seek to escape the worsening state of Windows might be interested too. Oh, and by the way, installing actual SteamOS via Steam Deck recovery images is an option too, and I suspect that Valve will someday more officially support a broader range of hardware configurations, but for now I decided that an OS designed with varied custom hardware in mind that intends to provide an equivalent user experience would be the safest bet. This is the first of what will be 2 videos. This one is focused on the hardware chosen and how I went about acquiring that hardware in a budget-conscious fashion for a build that seeks to provide comparable, and very likely slightly better, game performance compared to my PS5 Pro. You will get glimpses of the Bazzite user experience in the games I've been testing out here, but it eventually became clear to me that I had way too much to say about it for all of this to fit into one video. So that second video will focus on my perspectives as a console-first gamer using Bazzite for several months. Now, while I'm hardly a PC hardware expert, I do tend to actually enjoy putting together computers myself. But this time, our good friend Henry Clark was super excited to see this build come to life because he spec'd out a similar machine for himself before putting the idea on the back burner. So he stayed over for several days to help with the build, get Bazzite installed, test out a bunch of games, and generally help me avoid pitfalls that I might have run into on my own. Henry was one of several members of the My Life in Gaming and Backloggery communities who encouraged me to go this route in lieu of Valve's Steam machine. And indeed, he's actually been my chief PC part advisor for my 3 most recent computer builds, including this one. The parts were purchased this past November and December, many of them at the discounted prices that you'd hope to find at that time of year. Henry is a pro at watching all sources of discounts, so he was able to help me make smart choices in getting really nice parts while still pretty much, kinda sorta, keeping within my $1,000 budget. It's important to note up front here that even though NVIDIA GPUs tend to have the most advanced features, NVIDIA lags far behind on Linux driver support. So their hardware simply doesn't go as far on Linux as it does on Windows. Also, since Steam Deck and Steam Machine are AMD-based, SteamOS and, by extension, Bazzite also favor AMD graphics hardware for the fully integrated experience. Now, AMD is widely considered to have the best gaming CPUs currently, but this generation, they decide to not compete with NVIDIA in the high-end GPU market and only offer what people might variously classify as entry-level or mid-range 60 class and 70 class GPUs in their 9000 series lineup, though this does help me stay within budget. Coming from a console gamer's perspective, I think labeling the 16GB 9060 XT I chose for this build as entry-level would be selling it way short. It's said to be similar to the PS5 Pro and can even outperform it, though not dramatically so, which I think is both a great and sensible target for a dedicated living room gaming machine for someone who thinks that 120 frames per second is kinda neat, but far from a must-have. Though 120 FPS is absolutely attainable in simpler games. The reason I mentioned the GPU up front is that it was the main deciding factor in me going the custom build route over the Steam machine. The problem with the Steam machine is that while the CPU may be more modern and overall better than any current console CPU, the GPU has been pegged as probably falling a bit short even compared to a standard PlayStation 5. Of course, feelings on what value the Steam machine offers will vary, and I'm not necessarily saying I think it's a bad product. But for me, the thought of paying more than a PS5 for hardware that is in arguably its most important dimension lesser than a PS5 was pretty difficult for me to accept. Pay more, get less? Or pay more, get more? That's the idea at least, but as of the time I'm recording this, I still don't actually know what the price of the Steam machine will be. I sure hope it won't exceed this build in price because I've ended up with a clearly more powerful box, but prices keep getting worse, so... Of course, building a computer isn't for everyone, although it's not hard to learn, and perhaps you also know a Henry who can advise on parts, find the deals, and help you get it going. There's always the possibility that something could go wrong, perhaps where you least expect it. We had to take on a silly Yakuza-esque side quest ourselves to sort out an issue with missing screws and either faulty or non-standard standoffs that were in the open box case I'd purchased at Micro Center. Who'd have expected standoffs of all things to put the brakes on a build? After we finished building the computer and putting it through some extreme overnight stress tests on Windows before overriding it with Bazzite, Henry and I sat down to discuss our choice of hardware components.
While I'm steeped in PC gaming, tweaking, adding mods, all this kind of stuff to games, you're more of a console only. I just want to set it and go.
The choice of case, the Lian Li A3 Micro ATX Mini Tower, was key because while I would have preferred to go for an even smaller, even more console-like mini ITX form factor with something like the gorgeous Fractal Designs Terra, that route wouldn't have let me stick anywhere close to my target budget of $1,000.
You're going to pay more for a mini ITX motherboard, and you're going to pay more for a mini ITX case. You're also going to pay more for the type of power supply that's typically required to fit in the average mini ITX case.
Other micro ATX cases may also need the smaller, pricier power supplies used in mini ITX cases, called SFX and SFXL, so keep that in mind. Micro Center happened to have the Lian Li A3 on sale for $76.99, down from $99.99, and they gave me an additional 20% off due to it being a display model with some slight cosmetic damage, which I accepted in the interest of staying on budget. So $61.96 for a good case is a great start here. By the way, while I don't see myself going this far with any future upgrades, it's good to know that this Lian Li A3 case is deep enough to support even the biggest and priciest GPUs sold today. However, there was a bit of a hidden cost. This case doesn't include fans.
If you want the absolute best of the best fan that's really quiet and moving good airflow, Noctua, the best on the market. Problem is, those are $30 to $35 per fan.
We paid under $30 for 5 fans from Arctic.
Arctic makes fans that are 80 to 90% as good as the Noctuas, When you buy these, make sure you get the ones that are marked as PWM. That's how modern systems control the fans on the motherboard. PWM is pretty pivotal, I'd say, to making sure you have a system that's both quiet during most times and ramps up when needed.
Powering the system is a 750 watt fully modular PSU from MSI. 750 is absolutely overkill for this build, and I could even upgrade components to a point and this would still be plenty. Our stress test didn't even push it to anywhere near half of its potential output.
The peak I've seen was just a tick over 300. Realistically, the system would have run off a 350, but 350s don't exist for quality parts anymore.
Exactly.
And that comes to the thing with the power supply is you get quality. You're gonna have a hard time finding anything under 500, usually even under 600.
That's good quality.
Good quality these days.
As for the power efficiency rating,
do get something that's gold rated, but don't worry about trying to get titanium and platinum, get caught up in that for a system that you're going to be using for a couple of hours a day.
I paid $69.99 for this PSU on a deal offered directly through MSI's online storefront, which at the time was marked down from $129.99. And I could have had it for effectively $50 if I'd realized I'd had only a very limited window of opportunity to redeem the extra $10 rebate and $10 Steam voucher, so be vigilant for stuff like that, I guess.
I'm not typically huge on MSI as a brand, but when their more quality parts come up for a really good price, you don't ignore that.
So then, getting more into the proper guts of the system, the motherboard didn't need to offer terribly much flexibility since this rig is just for gaming. I went with the ASRock B650M HDV, which cost me $109. This motherboard is small enough to fit in my micro ATX case. I get dual channel RAM slots. I only need one of the PCIe slots for my graphics card, and I don't need to worry about potential bandwidth conflicts if I install another M2 SSD someday. Even though you could seek out a motherboard with a PCIe Gen 5 slot for the GPU, Henry doesn't think it's worth worrying about in the here and now, especially when being price conscious, but maybe even when going for the high end.
4 is all you realistically need, and even for the foreseeable future.
What is this?
This has Gen 4 for the GPU slot,
okay,
which, as beefy as the 5090 is, sees no real tangible difference between Gen 4 and Gen 5.
Really?
This does have a Gen 5 slot, the main slot for the storage. However, while there are Gen 5 drives for a gaming system, that doesn't actually have any real benefit. The peak speeds may be higher from loading from storage if you have a compatible drive.
I did actually end up getting one of Crucial's PCIe Gen 5 SSDs for the main M2 storage slot, kind of by accident, though the sale price was still quite nice. Unfortunately, though, the market situation for storage is catching up with RAM.
Crucial, who sadly has just exited the consumer market for all things RAM and storage, they were making some of the most reliable SSDs.
I decided to go for a 2TB SSD as the main storage, since it would help make this build's price easier to compare against the Steam Machine model with the higher capacity storage. But I gotta be honest, it's really hard to imagine me being satisfied with the constant fridge cleaning you'd have to do with just 512 gigs. And this is coming from a physical media enthusiast whose Steam library is probably a ton smaller than most.
And 2 terabytes is the sweet spot often for cost. When you're weighing how much per terabyte you're paying.
2 terabytes can still be pretty tough to work with. The most crucial deciding factor when it comes to the motherboard was, of course, whether to go for one with an Intel or AMD CPU slot. No one is really arguing for Intel over AMD for gaming CPUs at the moment.
Bazzite specifically, you should be able to run it on an Intel-based platform if you want, but the price for performance, and especially with the power considerations, AMD, as of right now, and has been for the past few years, is definitely the way to go.
Even on emulation, you would say? Because the conventional wisdom used to be, well, of course it's going to run like garbage, it's an AMD. That argument doesn't really hold up anymore, I don't think, right?
For the longest time, AMD was a better value, but Intel had what we call the higher IPC, instructions per clock, like how fast each individual core would perform. And that was pivotal for emulation. AMD's instruction per clock as of about the 5000 series overtook Intel pretty steadily. Before that, they were pretty close, and for a long time before that, they were close enough that it was a good value, but they straight up overtook them in Zen 3 era, and they've gone back and forth. Also, some stuff only relevant realistically to PS3 is the AVX 512 stuff. There's no guarantee on Intel versus AMD on that these days. That's only relevant if you're building a machine expecting to do a lot of PS3 emulation, though.
A big part of Henry's interest in this build revolved around power efficiency and seeing how close a PC could get to current gen console power draw while also outperforming the consoles.
The PS5 Pro pulls down about 250 maxed out. I was really curious about aiming at that 250 watt real world power target.
And in terms of power efficiency, AMD is also well ahead of Intel. Another key gaming advantage for AMD is their CPUs with X3D at the end of their model numbers, which just means that they use some fancy memory cache inside the CPU that's a big boon for gaming. Though do know that the X3D versions aren't necessarily the best choices for non-gaming rigs. The current generation of AMD CPUs, the Zen 5 series, currently only has X3D variants in 8, 12, and 16 core models.
Zen 5 was a little bit of a nice step up, but it requires more power to get there. Zen 4 was just the efficiency king.
With the 8-core X3D CPUs being too expensive for my budget and Henry's power target, we looked instead to the previous generation, the Zen 4 series. Though the CPU I bought, the 6-core AMD Ryzen 5 7600 X3D, is certainly not a dated product, having been released in August 2024, right when the first Zen 5 CPUs were hitting the market.
PC gaming is often based on what consoles are doing. Consoles currently have 8-core CPUs, but the PS5 reserves an entire CPU core and part of a second core for OS-related functions. This being 6 cores, the console effectively being about 6.5 cores. Most games are aiming towards that.
But that makes the 7600 X3D sound perilously similar, or perhaps even less potent than what's in the consoles. So am I really going to be matching or beating their performance? Well, fact is, this is a Zen 4 CPU, whereas the PS5 and Xbox Series console CPUs are based on Zen 2.
2 generations newer makes a pretty sizable difference. In instructions per clock, as we mentioned, it was Zen 3 when AMD really started getting a serious kick in their performance. Not to say that Zen 2 was bad, but Zen 4 was just a huge step up.
Unfortunately for general accessibility, I believe Micro Center is the exclusive retailer of the 7600 X3D model, at least in the US. But when Henry first linked me to this CPU on Micro Center's website at $229.99, he said it was already a steal for a CPU of its caliber, and he didn't expect cheaper discounts through December. So I went ahead and bought it. But when he alerted me a few weeks later that Micro Center had surprisingly dropped the 7600 X3D down to $199.99, they honored their 30-day price protection, and I was refunded $30, which is no small amount when I'm trying to be serious about the budget for this project. Now, the past several computers I've built have used top-end CPUs for intense video encoding and editing tasks, not gaming, and liquid cooling can definitely help a ton with systems like that. But it would be overkill for the proudly efficient 7600 X3D, so Henry was able to point me toward surprising savings in the CPU cooling department as well. I spent $14.39 from Amazon, I believe. What is this? What brand is this?
ID Cooling. 2 brands are right now thrashing the PC cooling market and putting out some killer coolers at all tiers of entry level up to some between mid to high end air coolers and all-in-one water cooling systems. Noctua makes like the most premium ones. The build quality is nicer, but the ID cooling stuff, and the same with Thermalright, which is their competitor, but they're doing the same job and making similar quality, making really high quality stuff in that $20 range or cheaper on sale.
The ID cooling unit I bought has 4 heat pipes going to 1 tower, which is plenty for a Ryzen 5 CPU, but if you're going for a Ryzen 7 or 9 class, you might want to get something a bit beefier. It did come with some kind of thermal compound, but I already had some new stuff I bought for a project I never got around to, so we just used that instead. I had no idea it was going to be hot pink. Anyway, when Henry was running his prime number finder stress test, which he says thrashes the CPU way harder than gaming ever could, temps under that heavy load tended to be around the mid 50s Celsius, which, hey,
that's good!
Now it's time for the most exciting part of a PC build, the GPU. But don't get too excited. As I already mentioned, this is an AMD Radeon RX 9060 XT with, crucially, 16 gigabytes of VRAM. One major reason PC enthusiasts have been warning people off 8GB graphics cards in recent years, and why Steam Machine's 8 gigs of VRAM have caused concern, is because ray tracing requires more VRAM. Love it or hate it, there are reasons for ray tracing beyond it just looking pretty.
Games are going to be requiring some at least minor ray tracing features more and more commonly going forward. It's just the new way of doing lighting because it's actually much easier and thus much cheaper development wise.
8GB graphics cards are also just much more limited with how far they can take texture quality and other features, especially with newer games. And of course, our prospects for affordably acquiring higher VRAM cards are starting to look grimmer these days. So I can't fault anyone for considering 8GB cards or the Steam Machine, depending on what you will be playing and at how low of a resolution.
8 gigs of VRAM on the Steam Machine will be fine for stuff from, we'll call it 2 or 3 years and older if you're playing more indie stuff, if they're focusing on stuff that people more likely to play on Steam Deck. And things that do run on Steam Deck are going to run great on Steam Machine with 8 gigs of VRAM. But if there are people looking for that console-like experience, you're probably going to see something that's more polished on the console side.
I was lucky enough to have bought this 16GB RX 9060 XT for $329.99, which is pretty low in graphics card land, even lower than what some 8GB cards are often sold for. It's not going to blow your socks off or anything, but it does let you push at least a bit beyond current console capabilities. You can go above 60 FPS with FreeSync in situations where the console versions don't offer unlocked frame rate modes, or bypass restrictions imposed by the developers where high-end graphics features are restricted to lower frame rate quality modes on the consoles. If you do want more though, the next step up, and AMD's maximum tier gaming card this generation, is the 9070 XT, which also has 16 gigs of VRAM.
I think retail on it has been in like $750 range.
So a whole PS5 Pro.
I've seen them as cheap on like crazy sales. Mind you, when I say these like instant sellout sales for like $590, and
that's a lot more than I would have wanted to spend.
And like a realistic price is $650 to $750, maybe even $800. But pretty dang powerful card. Good for the money. Just it's not a budget card by any means. It is a solid mid to high end card.
It's been quite a long time since the prevailing mood surrounding AMD graphics cards has been fairly positive. A big reason for that has been the introduction of FSR4, AMD's first upscaling technique to be comparable to NVIDIA's DLSS. Although, unfortunately, there are some rather confounding challenges in getting FSR to work in Linux at the moment. But it can be done by downloading tools through things like the Bazzite portal that allows games with FSR 3.1 to have those hooks be used for FSR4. And it absolutely can make a big difference in sharpness, clean edges, and reducing ghosting, even in ultra performance modes, which are reconstructing from a much lower base resolution than the final output. FSR4 isn't properly supported in Linux yet or by Valve's stable Proton releases, so this currently requires acquiring and using one of the more cutting-edge community branches of Proton, like the popular Proton GE, which can be grabbed from Bazzite's Proton Plus utility in the desktop mode. Another open source tool called Optiscaler can also help inject FSR4 and other upscalers like XeSS into even more games, though that's starting to push against the limits of the tweaking I'm willing to do in PC games before I start getting very annoyed with the amount of time I'm spending not just playing the gosh darn game. I'll talk a bit more about Optiscaler in the next video. Do know, though, that there are currently some compromises with VRR over HDMI with AMD hardware on Linux at the moment, due to a beef the HDMI forum has with their stuff being integrated into open source software. But if your display supports FreeSync Premium like my LG C1 OLED does, then you can use that. Though 4K will be limited to 420 with chroma subsampling if you're running at 120 Hz, which honestly is not a serious problem with almost any content that you'll be likely to use on a machine like this on a TV. I did have to bypass my AV receiver and use eARC back to the receiver for 5.1 audio though, because the AV receiver blocked the use of FreeSync. It seems to only like HDMI forum VRR. And actually, Valve too has been kind of dancing around the fact that they're dealing with the same challenges with VRR over HDMI on the Steam machine as well. So hopefully their drive to improve the situation will benefit everyone playing on Linux. But the current situation with FreeSync and chroma subsampling ended up being totally fine for my purposes. Mostly due to price, the 9060 XT I bought was manufactured by Power Color, which Henry assured me is a well-established manufacturer in the AMD GPU space, and it came with no preset overclock. In fact, I noticed that most AMD GPUs being sold were advertised as overclocked, and those also cost a fair bit more.
The card partners, they don't make a whole lot per card on the base MSRP cards. So they develop these bigger coolers that can, one, handle higher overclocks, run at lower temperatures, and often would be actually quieter, the ones with bigger coolers, but they put those out in higher numbers. Often that's also why you find those more expensive cards, because there's higher profit margins in them. Non-overclocked isn't going to perform necessarily much worse. Even the heaviest overclock cards see small, like sub 5% increases typically. Maybe not the heavy, or at least the affordable ones. We're ignoring. There's often
like
on
crazy.
The top model cards often have some heavy extreme overclock versions, like from Asus and MSI, often involving water cooling.
Got it. So yeah, clearly an overclocked GPU is not something to overthink for a build like this. But with all the other components discussed, we've finally got no choice but to address the elephant in the room: RAM. It used to not really be a major cost consideration in a PC build. Those were the good old days. But these days are not those days. Not only RAM sticks, but anything that uses memory has either been going up in price or is likely to go up in price soon. It's the main reason Valve has kept putting off announcing the Steam machine release date and pricing. Honestly, it kind of feels like we're hunkering down for something of a hardware winter while all these AI data centers are being built and gobbling up all our RAM. And that's exactly why I wanted to be proactive and make sure I felt set with my gaming equipment for a while.
Yes, the pricing kind of sucks right now and probably will for the next 12 to 18 months.
So if you want to stick to any sort of reasonable budget, you might have to think outside the box for where you source your main system RAM from. Henry had a pack of this laying around. I am compensating him with food. When I wrote my notes, I said equivalent RAM now would be like $350 plus. I think it's even higher now because we were at Micro Center yesterday. You paid $240 for this when it was brand spanking new, top of the line kit, and you're like, yeah, I want that in my main gaming rig. Like what, like
2022, the fastest kit you could buy in 2022.
So it's lightly used. You said that for most of this product's shelf life, it was $110.
Yeah, it bottomed out about 18 months after I bought it at about $110, where it stayed, because even though it was very fast, other faster RAM kits did come out. That being said, don't get caught up in buying crazy speeds. For an AMD system, an AM5 system specifically, all you realistically want and need is 6,000. Above that is beyond diminishing returns.
And we've actually tweaked the settings to run at 6,000 just to potentially be a little more stable, I guess.
Above 6,000 can be a little bit flaky, dependent entirely on what we call the silicon lottery. That's how good your CPU is. Your CPU is always going to meet the minimum specs of what it's supposed to be, but how good it can be pushed beyond those. So there's no guarantee you're going to get great performance or stability past that 6,000 mark without a lot of extra work. It can be done on almost any CPU with a lot of work. So we've set it to 6,000, which is the optimal performance for the effort and costs for an AMD system.
The kit Henry passed on to me is for the current memory standard, DDR5, and is 32 gigs, which is twice what the Steam machine has for system RAM. So could you get away with less or something older if you wanted to save money?
16 gigs doable if you have some already. The real problem is anything DDR5, you're typically not even going to have 8 gig sticks available.
Although we recorded this in January and dual 8 gig DDR5 packs have since started coming around on the market as a more affordable option if your PC gaming ambitions aren't terribly high. But what if you maybe wanted to split a pack of 16 gig sticks with a friend or something?
These CPUs the performance is all built around assuming you have dual channel memory. You really want 2 sticks of RAM whenever possible, because if not, you stand to give up anywhere between 5 and 20% of your CPU performance, depending on the scenario.
What about DDR4? Like if someone wanted to go down to like 32 gigs of DDR4, or is DDR4 cross-compatible with like the slots on this motherboard?
No, if you're doing that, DDR4 had already started going up before DDR5 because these companies have stopped producing or greatly turned down their production of DDR4 because no new systems are using DDR4. System RAM's not as heavily hit for gaming most cases. We are at a time when 16 gigs is becoming a little tough. A lot of that actually comes down to Windows. So with Bazzite being a lot thinner and SteamOS using so many fewer resources, I think that actually might be decently viable.
Well, that pretty much covers the hardware we put together and the considerations behind what we chose. The cost before sales tax came to what I think is an impressively low $962.80, plus some shawarma, pizza, fajitas, shrimp soba sandwiches, and breakfast platters for Henry's used RAM. The total cost would have been around $1,080 if I'd bought the RAM myself before prices started spiking. But today, buying that RAM new would have put my totals more in the $1,300 to $1,500 range. It would have been by far my most expensive component. And that's not even considering potentially higher SSD or GPU prices either. But I do think that doing a build similar to this on a similar enough budget is still possible if you're patient and seeking out deals, and maybe consider some used parts and repurpose a couple of components that you, a friend, or family member might be able to provide. I was pretty reluctant to pull the trigger on this project if it would have cost much more than $1,000, so the damage wasn't too bad given what a tough time it is to build a PC. Or frankly, buy much of anything. And if you're from the future, you might have some idea of how my costs here compared to the Steam machine. And by the way, if you'd like to listen to the full-length podcast-style version of our hardware discussion, which is almost 3 hours long, then the link to the unlisted video is in the description below. And you know what else is in the description? The link to our super nice shirts. We should probably shout these out more often because, YouTube don't pay so good no more. Anyway, Linux gaming really is moving fast these days. I've already written most of the script for the next video that goes more in depth about how this stubborn old console gamer's Bazzite experience is going, but who knows how much I'll have to revise by the time I finish it. But I'll go ahead and say that I'm really happy with it, and it mostly just works. It does have its quirks, but I've discovered simple enough workarounds for almost everything that didn't work quite right at first, like FreeSync not working when I routed it through my AV receiver. And thanks to the growing community efforts and impending launch of Steam Machine, I think Linux gaming, especially for those looking for a console-like experience, is going to look even more polished over the next year and beyond. While I don't have experience with them, there are other Linux distros out there that come pre-equipped with everything you need to hit the ground running with gaming on Linux. In fact, Bazzite is one of the co-founders of a group that was announced just a few weeks ago called the Open Gaming Collective. And you might want to take a look at some of the other distros and tools that are part of that, especially if you're not as caught up in the SteamOS controller navigation experience as I am. So no matter what hardware or distro you use, we'll all benefit, including Steam Deck and Steam Machine users. But that's all the time I have until the follow-up video on my Bazzite experience. Who'd have thunk you'd ever see a PC build video on my life in gaming? So big thanks to Henry for his RAM, wisdom, and manual labor. This whole project is definitely a bit of an experiment for me. Physical media is actually still in a much better place than most people realize in spite of setbacks like game keycards. Console versions of games are still excellent and generally ship in great shape, often better shape than the PC versions, with code on the disc or game card that is rarely in need of particularly serious patching, if at all. Listen, high-profile fiascos absolutely do not equal most physical games. Certainly not most of the games that I buy. And I also like that with console versions, I just accept that they are what they are and play them, versus PC where it's hard to not wonder if every flaw I see is something I can fix. Then it's hard to stop myself from wasting all my time looking into solutions. So I don't see myself straying away from physical media console gaming anytime soon. I mean, sure, I grabbed Indiana Jones on Steam here before the complete on-card Switch 2 version was announced, as well as Doom the Dark Ages because the existing PS5 and Xbox versions of both may as well be game key discs. I think that will be one guiding principle for my PC gaming. Get stuff on PC that has no physical or bad physicals. And because Steam sale prices can be so incredibly low and frequent, I've already double dipped on a few games I can play on PC with better settings compared to the console copies I already have. And for games that don't have physical copies, I'm honestly not very interested in building a large library locked to Nintendo, PlayStation, or Microsoft. I'm thinking I'd rather just get digital games on PC. I mean, if the PS6 doesn't have physical media, what reason do I even have to care about it? So this is kind of getting me prepped for a future, hopefully far enough away, where consoles might go digital only and thus become much less interesting to me. And hey, I'll admit, emulators and ports based on decompilations and recompilations can be pretty darn cool sometimes. I don't see myself becoming a PC-first gamer anytime remotely soon, but I do think that this is the end of me almost completely neglecting PC, and I'm excited to see where Linux gaming goes in the years to come.